Hi everyone, Andy here at Spy Master Gaming. Welcome back to the channel and a very warm welcome if it's your first time joining us. In today's video, I'm going to be putting to you, the viewer, the hypothetical question whether Warhammer the Old World, and by extension all other rank and flank games, are too intimidating for new hobbyists. And when I say new, I want to caveat that slightly by meaning anyone who entered into the hobby after 2015, which was the year where Warhammer Fantasy was replaced with Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And with that replacement, I firmly believe, came a change in design philosophy for models and the game system, which I believe has impacted the way that people paint. Now, this came about from a discussion I was having with a friend of mine who has never picked up a paintbrush, never touched a model, but is interested in the lore around Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k. And with the announcement of the Old World, I asked him whether he would be interested in joining me in starting an army for the Old World and showing him the sculpts, showing him what was being put out with the Bretonnian and the Tomb King releases. He simply said, no, there's not enough variety, and he thought he would get bored with it. And I started to have a bit of a wander around why this boredom could be the case. And this is where I think the change in design philosophy for the models may have a negative impact on modern hobbyists or newer hobbyists trying to go back to the old way of painting the older models. So if we look on screen here, you can see the Island of Blood box set, which was the last box set put out for Warhammer Fantasy, and you can see the first edition Warhammer Age of Sigmar box set as well. Now, the design in the Island of Blood is, not that not that much variety really. You've got the very simple color palette for the High Elves, and likewise with the Skaven. Some individuality amongst the sculpts, but by and large they are very similar looking. Whereas if we look at Age of Sigmar, you can see that the design principles have changed where all of the models are individually sculpted. Now, the Stormcast Eternals are relatively easy to paint. They are the start of faction, just armor plating with a bit of color to break it up. But if you look at the Khorne side of things, this is where it's a bit different. You are looking at intricately designed normal troops, which have the same level of detail as the heroes, and one could argue that they are more detailed than the heroes from the Island of Blood box set. Now, this has conditioned people to be able to paint a level of detail for the common troop, which is absolutely fine. You are dealing with the game system Age of Sigmar, which was one of the core principles of it was to have a lower model count than Warhammer Fantasy, as a high model count was perceived as one of the barriers to entry. So less models, but with more detail, which makes perfect sense. What I do believe it has done, though, however, is sort of impacted people in a negative way to think that the models that are coming with the old world, i.e. the older sculpts, are less deserving of their attention and may actually lead to a bit of burnout early on. Now, where I've looked at some of the early reviews for the old world, where people have received the products, some people have said, oh, these sculpts, they're not that detailed, they're boring, I don't see myself being able to paint all of this. And it's not that they're not detailed. I would say the counter argument to that is it's an appropriate amount of detail for the stature of that model on the tabletop. For example, a skeleton that can die relatively quickly from the Tomb King's army, you're not going to be wanting to put a massive amount of detail into that. Similarly, a horde of night goblins, which have pathetic stat lines, they are going to die in droves. So why would I invest an amount of time and effort into painting them to such a high standard, and need them to be also detailed if they are going to get wiped off the table relatively quickly? And I think this is where people will have to make overcome a mental barrier that may have subconsciously been put in place purely because of the design philosophy they have been exposed to in the 8-9 years since Age of Sigmar came about. The discipline of being able to paint similar poses without getting bored is a different discipline, in my opinion. I haven't been exposed to it in a long time. I was painting some night goblins from the Battle of Skull Pass box set a few evenings ago, and I started off with 10 of them. Limited colour palette, only about 4 colours on each model, and I did 10 of them in about an hour and a half. And even after that, I was struggling, and I was trying to put my finger on why I was struggling. And I think it is purely because I've been used to painting those individual models for so long now that going back to it is going to take some discipline. It's going to take a bit of practice for me to be able to get to an optimum level where I'm going to be comfortable with doing it again. Now, people who've never been exposed to Warhammer Fantasy may not be able to overcome that barrier. They may just simply see it as, I cannot paint the same model over and over again. I need there to be variety. I need there to be a difference in what I'm painting. Otherwise, I will go mad. And I think this will be really telling in the amount of new players that actually pick up and stick with the old world. I may be being melodramatic. I may be saying that it's two different disciplines in styles of painting. You might think that it's the same discipline, it's just applying it in a different manner. But I'd really like to get your thoughts on this, as I thought long and hard about it. As I really do want the old world to gain a bit of a following with new players. And if they can't overcome that barrier to being able to paint in a rank and flank situation, then I don't know what can be done about it, because does it mean that we have departed from a style of game that people can't willingly go back to? Or does it mean that essentially they will only be happy with purely all individual sculpts? There is an argument to be said, however, that there are other rank and flank games on the market that came about prior to Age of Sigmar, such as Kings of War, where the level of detail on the models and the difference in sculpts was a bit greater than what Games Workshop were putting out. Kings of War, for example, their latest armies, the halflings and the ogres, which I'll just show on screen now, there is quite a lot of variety in the individual troop poses. That might be the level of differentiation that people require, rather than having two similar poses to work with. But what do you think? Do you think I'm being silly? Do you think that I'm being overly negative? Or do you think I may have a valid point? I will obviously be a bit biased and say I think I do have a valid point, but happily to be corrected if you think I'm barking up the wrong tree. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you haven't done already, please like and subscribe to the channel. Still in the early days of YouTube at the moment, and want to obviously continue to grow it. If you haven't checked out my other video on alternative models for Warhammer the Old World, you can check it out here. Really sort of bit of a good deep delve into another company that's putting out some excellent alternatives to those common units that you may want to take a look at. So that's all for this one. Thanks very much for stopping by, and I will see you on the next one.